I was mopping the hallway outside the ICU when I heard the monitors start that slow, tired beeping that sounds more like sighing than warning. You learn the difference after enough years in a hospital. There's the sharp beep that means run, and there's the soft one that just sounds like a body giving up piece by piece. That night it was the soft kind. My name is Evelyn Carter. Most folks in that building just called me ma'am or hey, excuse me, if they bothered with words at all. I'd been pushing that mop and hauling that trash cart around Grant Memorial for almost 15 years. Longer than most of those shiny new doctors had been out of medical school, I can tell you that. I was born in 1958. I've cleaned every kind of mess people make when they're scared sick or selfish. Blood coffee tears vomit. Prayers whispered into pillows. Honey, it all dries on the same tile if you leave it long enough. My job was to make the floor look like nothing bad ever happened there. That's what I was doing that night, too. Cleaning up after everybody else. It was close to midnight, the kind of hour when the hospital gets quiet in a strange, heavy way. Visitors gone, TVs turned low, nurses moving softer, so they don't wake anyone up who's finally fallen asleep. The air smelled like bleach and old coffee and something sweet from the vending machine down the hall. I parked my cart against the wall and glanced at the nameplate outside the room at the end of the corridor, Dr. Helena Grant. I didn't need the nameplate to know it was her room. I'd wiped that gold lettering so many times the tips of my fingers knew every scratch in it. Dr. Grant wasn't just my boss. She was the first person with money and education who ever looked me in the eye like we were standing on the same ground. A black woman who built an entire chain of community clinics out of nothing but grit and student loans and faith. She used to say, if they won't build for us, we'll build for ourselves. I still remember the first day I met her. I was in my 50s, already worn down from cleaning rich people's houses in the suburbs, the kind where they got more bathrooms than family members and less love than either one needs. I'd applied for the night cleaning job at the clinic because I needed the health insurance more than I needed the paycheck. The HR girl had barely looked up at me. Night janitorial, minimum wage, no overtime. You still want it? I nodded, clutching my worn-out purse. Yes, ma'am. She had started to slide the paper across when a voice behind her said, Is that Ms. Carter? I turned and there she was. Dr. Helena Grant. White coat, stethoscope, tired eyes, and that posture of somebody who's been fighting all day but refuses to bend. Yes, ma'am, I said, straightening my shoulders without meaning to. She walked around the desk, wiped her hand on a napkin from a coffee cup, and held it out to me. I'm Helena. You're the one with 20 years' experience cleaning hospitals, nursing homes mostly. I corrected softly. And some private homes, but yes, ma'am. She smiled. That's Ms. Carter to you, she said to the HR girl. Then she looked back at me. You want nights because of your breathing right? Less dust, less traffic, fewer perfumes and colognes? I blinked. How did you... You marked asthma on your form, she said. I read what I sign. Then she lowered her voice. And around here we don't ma'am women who work twice as hard for half as much. We call them by their names. Welcome, Ms. Carter. That was Helena. Years later, when she expanded her clinics and opened the hospital, I went with her. When the sign outside changed to Grant Memorial, folks joked that she wasn't even dead yet, but already had a hospital named after her. She'd just laugh and say, I built this for my people, not for my ego. When I go, I want it to still be standing. But now she was in one of her own hospital beds, in one of her own ICU rooms, with one of those plastic bracelets digging into paper-thin skin. 68 years old, all that fire and stubbornness chewed down to a weak smile and trembling hands. And sitting beside her that night was her husband, Richard Grant. I still have to make myself say his last name. It feels like giving him something he doesn't deserve. Richard came into our lives 2 years earlier, slick as lotion. He was handsome in that polished older man way, silver hair, perfect teeth, suits that hung just right. The kind of man you expect to see in an expensive restaurant holding a glass of red wine, not in a community hospital talking to nurses. He met Helena at some medical charity gala, that's what they said. Came from old money, which is usually just a pretty phrase for somebody whose granddaddy had time to stack coins, while other people's granddaddies were still trying to get their names on mortgage papers. He was charming to everyone knew how to listen, just enough talk, just enough, and never once raised his voice in public. He called me Ms. Evelyn the first time we met. I remember thinking that was nice. I remember being grateful. Funny how your standards get set so low when you've been invisible most of your life. Now standing in that hallway with my mop bucket, I could see him through the narrow glass window in Helena's door. The room was dim except for the blue light from the monitors and the little lamp in the corner. Helena's chest rose and fell under the thin blanket. Tubes wires all that tubing they put in people when they want to keep them alive just a little bit longer. Richard was sitting on the side of the bed, leaned in close, holding her hand like some scene from a movie. His head was bent so I couldn't see his face. I told myself to mind my own business. I dipped my mop back into the dirty water and wrung it out, pressing the handle down with more force than I needed. My knees were aching, my back was tight, my feet were complaining inside those cheap white sneakers the hospital gave us. "Just get through the shift, Eve," I whispered to myself. "You can soak them in Epsom salt when you get home." I started mopping in slow practice strokes, the kind of rhythm your body falls into when it knows the work better than your mind does. Forward, pull back. Forward, pull back. The hallway was empty except for me and the soft beeping drifting from Helena's room, and then I heard his voice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. That's what chilled me. He leaned over her, brought her hand up to his lips, and said in this low, smiling whisper, "Just 3 more days, baby. 3 days, and everything is finally mine." The mop stopped in the middle of the tile. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just stood there, gripping that sticky handle while the words crawled across my skin like ice water. 3 more days. I told myself I must have misheard. Maybe he said you'll feel fine in 3 days. Maybe he was talking about some treatment, some paperwork, something I didn't understand. I'd never gone to college. I barely got out of high school before life started needing rent money out of me. But I had cleaned enough hospital rooms to know the sound of patience in a voice and the sound of hunger. That man sounded hungry. He let her hand drop back to the bed and sat up straight. I ducked my head down like I was studying a stain on the floor, praying he wouldn't look up and see me staring. He smoothed his tie, patted Helena's arm. "You rest," he said more loudly this time, like a man putting on his public voice. "I'll talk to the doctor in the morning." I saw him brush a strand of gray hair away from her forehead, like he was the most devoted husband God ever made. I watched through that glass as he carefully adjusted her blanket, turned off the small lamp, and pressed the call button to let the nurse know he was leaving for the night. Then he walked to the door. I yanked my eyes down to my mop like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my gums. I tried to look bored, tired, like any other night shift janitor working for a little overtime. The door opened with a soft hiss. He stepped out, pulling it closed behind him. For a second, all I saw were his shiny shoes and the crease in his pants. I kept my head down. "Evening, Ms. Carter," he said smoothly. He remembered my name. Of course he did. Men like that always remember the names of the people they want to keep loyal, and the people they think won't matter if things go wrong. "Evening, Mr. Grant," I murmured without looking up too fast. "Sheet resting, okay." He sighed, the kind of sigh people use when they want sympathy. "She's tired," he said. "The doctors say her body's shutting down. It's just a matter of time now." I swallowed. "I'm sorry to hear that." He gave me a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "We all have our time right," he said. "At least she won't have to worry about this place. I'll take care of everything." I nodded because that's what you do when you're wearing a name badge that says Environmental Services, and your paycheck depends on not asking follow-up questions. He straightened his jacket. "You have a good night," he said, already checking his phone as he walked away down the hall. I watched his back retreat until he turned the corner by the elevators. The soft ding of the elevator doors opening drifted down the corridor. Then it was just me again. Me, the mop, the hum of the hospital's old air conditioning, and the slow beeping from Helena's room. I stood there for a long moment, the mop head dripping onto the clean floor, my mind replaying his whisper inside that dark room. 3 more days. Then everything is finally mine. There's a special kind of knowing that comes with age. It doesn't shout. It doesn't come with charts or articles or long words. It's just a weight in your chest that says, something here ain't right. I'd heard that voice in my life before, in landlords counting down to evictions, in bosses calculating hours they could shave off a paycheck, in men watching their sick relatives like vultures circling high waiting for the last breath so they can call the lawyer. Standing there in that hallway, I felt that same chill slide up my spine. What kind of husband counts down to his wife's death like it's a winning lottery ticket? The mop slipped from my hand and clattered softly against the bucket. I jumped at the sound, glanced around to make sure no one had heard, and then picked it back up, fingers trembling. I forced myself to finish mopping that stretch of floor, step by step, even though my mind was no longer on the tiles. I wasn't just cleaning outside a patient's room anymore. I was standing outside the door of a woman who built a whole lifeline for people like me while her husband sat inside and talked about her last days, like a deadline on a business deal. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt something heavy and dangerous wake up inside me. I felt afraid. Not for me, for Helena. Fear will wake you up faster than any cup of hospital coffee. I stood there in that hallway, fingers wrapped so tight around the mop handle, my knuckles ached, and for a moment I thought, maybe I'm just tired. Maybe I'm hearing things I want to hear. Maybe I'm making trouble where there is none. Then another voice in me, the older one, the one that's been through a few too many storms, said, Evelyn, you know better. The truth is that whisper from Richard wouldn't have hit me so hard if Helena had been just another patient. Just another name on a chart, another body in a bed. But she wasn't another anything. To understand why my heart dropped when I heard him say, 3 more days, you have to understand who Helena Grant was to me. And to people like us. I didn't grow up around doctors. I grew up around women who worked themselves half to death and then prayed they didn't get sick because sickness was a luxury we couldn't afford. My mama cleaned houses for white families in the suburbs. My daddy worked at a warehouse until his back gave out, and then he sat in a chair by the window for the next 20 years, watching other people walk to their cars in the morning. We didn't go to the doctor. We waited until somebody couldn't breathe or couldn't stand, and then we went to the emergency room and hoped they didn't ask too many questions about insurance. I got my first real look at a hospital from the wrong side of a mop bucket. Nursing homes, too. Let me tell you something, when you're the one cleaning under the beds, you see a lot of things folks think nobody sees. You see old black men with war stories no one wrote down, parked in wheelchairs by windows that don't even open. You see women who raised everybody else's babies left to stare at ceiling tiles and listen to call lights no one is answering. You see bills taped to charts like threats. You see families fighting over money in the hallway, while somebody's last breath rattles through a plastic tube on the other side of the door. By the time I met Helena, I was tired clear down in my bones. It was around the time I turned 52. My youngest had just moved out. My knees were starting to complain every time it rained, and the lady whose house I'd cleaned for 10 years had decided to go with a service instead of keeping me on. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with the job listing section from the paper, a cup of instant coffee, and my inhaler next to it, feeling like the world had moved on without me. Then I saw the ad. Night shift environmental services, community clinic, benefits available, experience preferred. I circled it 3 times. Environmental services sounded fancier than janitor, but the work looked the same. Cleaning trash floors, bathrooms. The magic word was benefits. At my age, a job with health insurance in this country is like someone throwing you a life jacket and saying, you can grab on, but you still got a kick. The clinic was on the edge of our neighborhood, squeezed in between a payday loan place and a laundromat. Nothing about the outside looked special. Brick, a faded sign, a couple of sad bushes that nobody watered. But inside was different. It smelled like sanitizer and coffee, and something else, hope maybe if hope has a smell. That was where I met Helena. She was in her late 50s then, maybe early 60s, but she walked like a woman who refused to let age tell her what to do. Her hair was silver at the temples, pulled back neat. Brown skin, crow's feet around the eyes from squinting at charts and smiling too much. She wore a lab coat over a simple dress and sneakers instead of fancy shoes. The first thing I noticed was that she moved fast, but not rushed. Like she'd been moving at that speed her whole life. After that first day when she insisted on calling me Ms. Carter and shook my hand like I was a real person, I went home and sat at my little kitchen table thinking about her. I'd never had a boss who looked like me and treated me like that at the same time. Over the years between exam rooms and waiting rooms and bathrooms, I got to know her story. Her mama had worked in a factory. Her daddy had driven a bus. She'd gone to school when schools didn't always want girls like her in their classrooms. She told me once while I was wiping down exam tables and she was finishing charts about a professor who'd said to her, "Medicine is demanding Miss Grant. Are you sure you don't want to choose something more realistic?" She'd smiled at him. She said the same way she smiled at those big-shot donors when they tried to talk over her in board meetings. Then she told him, I was born into unrealistic doctor. Right now, I'm just choosing the kind that saves lives. Helena didn't just open one little clinic and stop. She opened another, then another. Places where people could walk in with no insurance and still walk out with their blood pressure checked and their prescriptions filled. She fought with pharmaceutical reps, argued with insurance companies, begged and scolded and charmed and pushed until doors opened that had been closed for decades. They'll tell you healthcare is a privilege, she told me once while I scrubbed a coffee stain off the staff room counter. They're wrong. Breathing shouldn't depend on how big your bank account is. Helena talked, I listened. That was our rhythm. Once during a late night at the old clinic, a storm knocked out the power. The generator failed for a while and we sat in the dark with only a few emergency lights glowing red, like tired eyes in the hallways. She came and sat in the waiting room with me, her white coat folded over the back of a plastic chair, and we just talked. I wanted to build something nobody could take away, she said, looking at the outlines of the chairs. Hospitals can shut down, politicians can cut funding, but if people trust a place, not the building, the people, they'll fight for it to stay standing. You built more than a place, I said quietly. You built a lifeline. She smiled at me, then soft and tired. I built it with a lot of people's hands, including yours, Ms. Carter. Don't you go forgetting that. No one had ever put me in the same sentence as something that mattered before. So when she expanded and they broke ground on Grant Memorial, I was there. Not with a golden shovel and a ribbon-cutting ceremony, but in the background hauling boxes of supplies, making sure the bathrooms didn't smell like construction dust, learning the maze of new hallways so I could clean them faster when the doors finally opened. When that big sign went up, Grant Memorial Hospital, I stood on the sidewalk with my lunch in a brown paper bag and looked at it for a long time. People walking past probably thought I was waiting on a bus. I wasn't. I was waiting on the feeling in my chest to settle. I thought a black woman's name on a hospital, not as a patient, not as a housekeeper, as the owner. For people my age, that kind of thing isn't just a news story. It's a crack in the sky. Over the years, Helena and I built our own kind of friendship in the spaces nobody pays attention to. In the 5 minutes between her last patient and her next meeting. In the quiet time between my bathroom checks. We didn't talk like girlfriends. We talked like two women who'd seen enough of the world to skip the small talk. Sometimes she'd bring an extra cup of tea and leave it on the counter for me with a sticky note, Ms. Carter. Sometimes I'd tuck a granola bar from the vending machine onto her desk when I saw she hadn't eaten all day. We didn't hug, that wasn't our way. But there was this one time after a particularly rough week, 3 funerals, one of them a young man who'd been in and out of her clinic since he was 9, that she came into the supply closet where I was restocking paper towels. She leaned against the shelf, closed her eyes for a second like the world was heavy, then opened them and said, "You ever get tired of fighting, Ms. Carter?" "All the time," I answered, tossing an empty cardboard box aside. "But then I remember the rent's due." She laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Sometimes I think if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, half the city would breathe easier and the other half would lose the only place they can afford to breathe at all." "Don't talk like that," I scolded her automatically, because in a black mama's mouth that's almost a prayer. She looked at me, then really looked. "I'm serious," she said quietly. "If anything ever happens to me, I want this place to keep standing. I want my people to have somewhere to go when their lungs give up and their blood sugar spikes and their hearts break." She reached over and tapped the side of my hand with her finger just once. "Promise me something, Ms. Carter. If you ever see anybody trying to turn this place into their personal piggy bank, you raise hell. You hear me?" I swallowed. "I'm just the woman with the mop, Dr. Grant." She shook her head. "No, you're the one who sees what everyone else pretends isn't there. That makes you dangerous in a good way. Don't let them make you forget that." I didn't know it then, standing in that cramped supply closet with the smell of bleach in my nose and cardboard under my feet, but that little conversation was going to come back to me like a voice in a burning house. Because years later, after she married Richard and started wearing those elegant scarves and pearls he liked to buy her, people said she was finally slowing down. They said it like it was a good thing. "She deserves nice things," the nurses whispered. "She's worked so hard." I agreed with them. Lord knows she'd earned every soft pillow and every vacation she never took. But something in me tensed when I watched that man move through her world. He knew how to touch her shoulder at just the right time, how to pour her a glass of wine at just the right moment, how to stand behind her in pictures like he'd always belonged there. He learned the nurses' names within a week, sent fruit baskets to the break room, called the older doctors sir and the younger ones kiddo, like he had some right to everybody. People loved him. That's the funny thing about charm, it's like perfume. Everybody smells it, even the ones it's choking. It wasn't one big thing that made me uneasy. It was 1,000 little ones. The way he was always checking his watch around her appointments, the way he'd stand in the doorway of a room just long enough to hear the end of a conversation, the way he'd talk about assets and liabilities when he thought no patients were listening. I pushed those feelings down the way you push a loose nail back into the floorboard with your heel when you don't have a hammer handy. Not my business, not my world. I clean the dirt, I don't rearrange the furniture, but you can only ignore that inner voice for so long before it starts talking louder. So when I heard him whisper, "Just 3 more days, baby," 3 days, and everything is finally mine over Helena's frail hand in that ICU room. It wasn't the first time my spirit had flagged him as trouble. It was just the first time I let myself admit it. That night, as I finished my shift, every memory of Helena's words came back to me. Promise me, if you ever see anybody trying to turn this place into their personal piggy bank, you raise hell. Back then, I thought she was talking about some greedy board member or a shady pharmaceutical rep or a politician with budget cuts in his pocket. I never imagined she might be talking about the man sleeping on the same pillow as her. I went home at dawn, the sky that faded blue color. It gets just before the sun decides if it's coming up or not. My little apartment felt smaller than usual. I kicked off my shoes by the door, eased myself into the chair by the window, where I kept my Bible and my blood pressure pills, and just sat there. The city was waking up, cars starting, kids arguing on their way to the bus stop, somebody's radio playing an old soul song. Life going on like it always does, like it doesn't know it's bouncing on a thin, thin edge. I closed my eyes and saw Helena's face pale against the hospital pillow. I heard Richard's whisper slick and warm like oil on dirty water. 3 more days. I'd spent a lifetime minding my business, staying in my lane, keeping my head down, so my name stayed off the wrong kind of paperwork. It had kept me alive. It had kept a roof over my head. It had also kept me quiet when maybe I shouldn't have been. Sitting there in that chair, my hands folded in my lap, I realized something that scared me even more than that man's voice. If I did nothing and Helena died on his schedule, I was going to have to live the rest of my days knowing I'd heard him counting down, knowing I'd looked the other way. And for the first time, that old habit of staying quiet didn't feel like safety. It felt like sin. I wish I could tell you that the very next day I marched into somebody's office, slammed my hand on a desk, and said, "Something's wrong here." That would make me sound brave. But the truth is, I went back to work. Fear doesn't always make you run. Sometimes it makes you move slower, quieter, like you're hoping the danger will forget you're there. I went in that night like I always did. Put on my uniform, pinned my badge, checked my cleaning cart, checked my inhaler. I nodded at the security guard, waved at the night nurse, and told myself a story I could live with. Maybe he meant the paperwork would be finished in 3 days. Maybe he meant she'd be home in 3 days. Maybe I'm old and tired and hearing things. I clung to maybe like a life preserver, but maybe didn't last long. Once your eyes are open, it's hard to make them go back to sleep. Little things I might have ignored before started standing out like stains on white sheets. Richard was there every evening like clockwork. That's not a bad thing by itself. Husbands should visit their sick wives. But he didn't sit there holding her hand, praying, not really. He was always managing things. I saw him by the nurse's station more than I saw him at her bedside. He'd stand there with his expensive watch, catching the fluorescent light, asking questions about dosages and schedules, talking softly to the doctor assigned to her case. Not her regular doctor, the one she'd worked with for years, but some man I'd never seen before brought in as a consult. He had one of those smiles that never touched his eyes either. One night I was wiping down the counter by the vending machines when I heard Richard's voice drift around the corner. "I just need her comfortable," he was saying. "We both know there's no coming back from this. You understand." The doctor murmured something I couldn't catch. "We've talked about the compensation," Richard added, soft as silk. "You'll be taken care of. Everyone will. I just need this, wrapped up neatly. No surprises. Of course," the doctor said. "We'll keep adjusting her medication. It won't be long now." My hand froze on the spray bottle. My heart tried to hammer its way out of my chest. I must have made some sound because a second later I heard footsteps. I grabbed a bag of chips off the vending machine shelf like I'd been standing there deciding between flavors this whole time. Richard came around the corner, phone in his hand, expression smooth. The doctor peeled away toward the elevators. "There you are," Richard said, smiling. "Burning the midnight oil." "Yes, sir," I answered, wrestling the chips free like it was the hardest job in the world. "These floors don't clean themselves." He chuckled like we were sharing some warm little joke, then patted my shoulder, a quick patronizing tap that made my skin crawl. "Good to know some people still take pride in their work," he said. "We're all a team here, right?" "Yes, sir," I said again, because that's what my mouth had been trained to say when my brain was screaming something else. He walked away, humming under his breath. I put the chips back without really seeing them. The next evening when I came on shift, there was a new addition to the little table in Helena's room, a tea set, pretty delicate cups with tiny blue flowers painted on them, and next to it a small tin labeled Herbal Rest Blend. I watched from the doorway as Richard poured a cup and held it up to Helena's lips. "You know you sleep better with this," he crooned. Doctor's orders. Gotta keep that blood pressure down. Helena was so tired she could barely lift her head. She took a few sips, trusting. Why wouldn't she? The woman had stared down racist administrators and stingy donors and state health inspectors. You'd think if danger came for her, it would wear a proper villain's mask, not a wedding ring. As he set the cup down, I stepped in with my mop bucket. Excuse me, I said softly. Just need to get that corner behind the IV stand, ma'am. Helena's eyes flickered toward me, and for a second there, behind the fog of pain and drugs, I saw the old fire. She gave me the tiniest nod. Richard flashed me a charming smile. Evening, Miss Carter, he said. Keeping our little kingdom spotless, I see. Doing my best, I murmured. As I pushed the mop along the floor, the smell of the tea drifted up. It wasn't like the chamomile or peppermint she used to drink in her office late nights. This had a bitter edge to it under the flowers. Something metallic like a penny on your tongue. I watched him unscrew the cap of a brown pill bottle and shake 2 tablets into his palm. Time for your nighttime medication, sweetheart, he said. I already had my pills, Helena mumbled, voice thick. These are the new ones, he replied. Remember? The specialist adjusted the dose. He slipped them between her lips, then lifted the cup again to help her wash them down. She swallowed, trusting her throat working weakly. My stomach twisted. When he finally left and the nurse came in to check her vitals, I wheeled my cart a little closer under the excuse of emptying the trash. There in the bin was an old prescription bottle with Helena's name on it tossed away like yesterday's mail. The label showed a different medication than the one he'd just given her. Later in the staff restroom, I watched 2 nurses washing their hands, whispering. They changed her meds again, one asked. The other shrugged. New orders. Doctor says it's end-of-life comfort management. Family's on board. Family. I dried my hands slowly, pretending not to listen, as my ears strained for every word. Poor Dr. Grant, the first nurse said, shaking her head. At least her husband's devoted. He's here every day. Yeah, the other replied, reaching for a paper towel. Some people die alone in here. She won't. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. Tired eyes, gray at my temples, skin mapped with years. The face of somebody who'd seen a lot and kept a lot to herself. Mind your business, the old habit whispered. You don't know medicine. You don't know all the details. You're just the cleaning lady. But then another voice rose up louder now. You heard him counting down. You heard him talk to the doctor. You saw him change those pills. You're not blind. You're not crazy. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the neighbor's TV through the thin wall, my heart pounding in the dark. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Helena's face washed out and small against that big white pillow. You have to understand, by then, I'd known that woman for over a decade. I'd watched her stand up to men twice her size in boardrooms. Watched her fight insurance companies on the phone until her voice went hoarse. Watched her work straight through her own migraines because my patients can't reschedule their blood pressure. She was the strongest woman I knew. Now she couldn't even say no to a cup of tea. On the 3rd night, after I heard that whisper those cursed 3 days, I made up my mind. I didn't call the police. I didn't march into the administrator's office. I didn't go to the press or a lawyer or anybody else with a degree on the wall. I went to Helena. It was late. The ICU was quiet, lights dimmed, machines humming like tired bees. I timed my steps between the nurses' rounds like I'd been timing my cleaning breaks for years. When you spend your life on other people's schedules, you get good at sliding into the empty spaces. I paused outside her door, smoothed my uniform over my hips, and knocked gently. Come in, came a faint voice. She was more awake than usual. Somebody had propped her up a little, and there was an untouched cup of tea on the table, steam-gone film forming on the surface. Her hair was thinner now, pulled back from her face. That proud, straight nose. Those eyes that had once pinned politicians to their chairs, now fluttering with effort. Miss Carter, she said, a weak smile tugging at her mouth. Am I getting VIP cleaning service tonight? I shut the door softly behind me, feeling my pulse in my throat. Just me, Dr. Grant, I said. Same as always. She watched me for a second, a little frown gathering between her brows. You look troubled, she murmured. Sit down for a minute. That floor can survive without you. Old habits die hard. I hovered there, hand on the mop, torn between the instinct to keep moving and the need to finally stop. Come on, she whispered. Lord knows I've given you enough lectures about working through your breaks. Sit. I set the mop against the wall and pulled the visitor's chair closer, the rubber feet scraping softly on the linoleum. Up close, she looked even smaller under all those blankets. Her skin was dry. There were bruises blooming along her arms where they'd missed veins. I folded my hands in my lap to keep from wringing them. "How you feelin' tonight?" I asked, like I've been run over by a truck backed over again, then put on a slow boil. She answered, a bit of her old humor flickering. Then her eyes sharpened. "And like you have something you want to say?" I tried to smile and failed. "You know me too well. I know you've never been able to hide a thought in your face a day in your life," she said softly. "Out with it, Ms. Carter. I'm too tired for small talk." I took a breath that felt like it scraped my ribs on the way in. "I heard something the other night," I began. "From Mr. Grant." Her gaze flickered just enough for me to see she was listening with more than her ears. "He was in here with you," I continued, "holding your hand. I was out in the hall mopping. He leaned in and he said—" The words stuck. Saying them out loud felt like opening a door and inviting a storm in. He said what Helena pressed gently. He said, "Just 3 more days, baby. 3 days and everything is finally mine." My voice shook. That's what he said. Silence. The monitors beeped steadily. Somewhere down the hall a machine hissed. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Helena's eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp or cry. She just went very, very still. "What else?" she asked. I swallowed. "I've seen him bringing you that tea. Those pills. I saw a different bottle in the trash. I heard him talking to that new doctor by the vending machines. About wrapping things up. About compensation." I forced myself to meet her eyes. "I might not know medicine, Dr. Grant, but I know when a man's waiting on something to be over so he can collect." Her gaze stayed locked on mine for a long time. Longer than was comfortable. It felt like being scanned not by a machine but by a person who'd spent her life diagnosing not just bodies but motives. "And you're telling me this why, Ms. Carter?" she asked finally, voice barely above a whisper. "Because you told me to," I said, "in that supply closet years back. You said if I ever saw anyone trying to turn this place into their piggy bank, I should raise hell." Her lips twitched. "I remember," she breathed. "I don't know if I'm right," I rushed on. "Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've just watched too many true crime shows at 2 a.m. when my knees hurt and I can't sleep. But if I'm right and I keep quiet, then I'm helping him. And I can't." My voice broke. "I can't clean around that." Something like regret passed across her face. "I should have changed that will a long time ago," she murmured more to herself than to me. I stiffened. "The will." She nodded, eyes drifting toward the ceiling for a moment, then back to me. I was tired, Evelyn. Tired of fighting. Tired of being the strong black woman for everybody all the time. When Richard came along, it felt nice to let someone else carry the bags just for a bit. Her gaze hardened even through the haze of painkillers. But I didn't survive segregation medical school and running this circus to hand my life's work over to a man who sees it as a line item. My throat tightened at the way she said my life's work. Not my money, not my hospital, my people's lifeline. She reached for my hand. Her fingers were cool bones sharp under thin skin, but the grip was still there, the same stubborn pressure she'd used on reporters and board chairs. "Listen to me, Ms. Carter," she said quietly. "If you're wrong, I'd rather you speak than sit there and watch me die with your mouth shut. If you're right—" She paused, eyes blazing with a shadow of the old fire. "If you're right, then we don't have much time." Tears stung my eyes. "I didn't want to upset you." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Cancer upset me. Betrayal upsets me. The truth." Her thumb brushed over my knuckles. "The truth sets the table so we can decide what to do next." She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength, then opened them again with effort. "Don't you dare let him see you scared," she whispered. "And don't you dare go quiet on me now." I felt something shift inside my chest then. Like a door I'd kept bolted all my life had just been unlatched by a dying woman in a hospital bed. "All right," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "What do you need me to do?" Helena's lips curved in the faintest smile. Her hand squeezed mine light but certain. "First," she said, "you're going to help me stay awake long enough to rewrite a few things." In that moment, with the machines humming and the night pressing against the window, the roles between us turned on their heads. For years, she'd been the one fighting for everyone else's life. Now she was asking me to help her fight for what would happen after hers ended. When a woman like Helena says she wants to rewrite a few things, she isn't talking about grocery lists. I sat there, my hand still in hers, feeling my pulse thudding against her paper-thin skin. "Stay awake," I repeated. "They've got you on all kinds of stuff. Half the time you can't keep your eyes open 5 minutes. "That's the point," she rasped. "Sedated people sign whatever's handed to them. I don't plan on being sedated when it matters. She nodded toward the untouched cup of tea on the table. He's been generous with the sleep aids. My chest tightened. You knew that tea was different? I may be sick, Ms. Carter, she said dryly, but I'm not stupid. He started bringing those little blends right around the time my original oncologist left. The timing was a little too perfect. Why didn't you say something I asked hurt before I could stop myself? She gave me a look that was half apology, half iron, because by the time I put the pieces together, I was already neck-deep in morphine and decision fatigue, and because I wanted to be very sure before I accused my husband of trying to hurry me into the grave. I looked down at our hands, hers small in mine, and now I'm sure enough, she said, and you just confirmed what my gut's been whispering. She drew in a shaky breath. I let my guard down. That's on me. But I don't intend to let my life's work go with it. Her eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. The red second hand swept around and around each tick, a little reminder that 3 days was not a metaphor, it was a countdown. I need my attorney, she said. Not the firm Richard likes. Mine. The one I had before him. At this hour I hesitated. He might be asleep. So wake him, she snapped, a flash of her old self sparking. He's taking a healthy fee to manage my estate. The least he can do is answer the phone when the estate holder says she's being poisoned. The bluntness of the word made me flinch. Poisoned. It sounded like something out of a movie, not something people did to a woman who'd spent her life keeping other people breathing. But then again, I'd seen worse things dressed in polite clothes. All right, I said. How do we do this? You want me to call from the nurse's station? From your office line, I don't want to set off any alarm bells. She thought for a moment, eyes half closed. There's a number in my phone under Pastor Thomas, she murmured. It's not my pastor. It's my lawyer. We got sick of his wife screening my calls. You'll find my cell in the drawer by the window. Code is 1958, her birth year. Of course. I went to the little rolling table by the window, pulled open the drawer, and there it was. Her phone screen dark case worn at the edges. I punched in 1958 and it opened like it had been waiting on me. The contact list was full of names that meant nothing to me. Surgeons, donors, volunteers. I scrolled until I found Pastor Thomas and pressed call. A groggy male voice answered on the third ring. Hello, Mr. Whitfield. I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I meant. Who's calling? Suspicion, irritation, all packed in those 2 words. This is Evelyn Carter. I work for Dr. Grant. At Grant Memorial. A beat of silence. Then more alert, Ms. Carter. Is Dr. Grant all right? I glanced at her. She nodded, insisting with her eyes. She's alive, I said, but she needs you. Tonight, at the hospital. She says it's urgent and it's about her will. Another pause. Papers rustled on the other end like he was already sitting up in bed. Is Richard there? He asked. Not right now, I replied. He left for the night. Good, he muttered mostly to himself. Then louder. Don't discuss anything else over the phone. Text me the room number. I'll be there in 45 minutes. He hung up without another word. I exhaled slowly, the air shaking on the way out. He's coming, I told Helena. Good, she whispered. Now we buy me some time. Time I looked at the teacup, the pill bottles, the IV drip. How? By not drinking anything that man brings me, she said, and by letting the nurses think the drowsiness is from the morphine, not whatever extra little goodies he's slipping into my regimen. You think the doctor's in on it? I asked. She shrugged weakly. At the very least, he's looking the other way. Nobody changes meds this often without a conversation, and that conversation wasn't with me. Guilt pricked me. I'd watched it happen. I'd smelled that metallic scent. I'd waited until now to speak. I'm sorry, I murmured. She squeezed my hand again. Don't spend your strength on sorry, she said. Spend it on what we're going to do next. The next hour passed in a strange, suspended kind of quiet. I went through the motions, checked the trash, straightened the chairs, pretended to clean things that were already clean just in case any nurse poked her head in. Helena closed her eyes now and then, but I could tell she was forcing herself to stay in the shallow end of sleep instead of sinking. Finally, the door cracked open, and a man in a rumpled suit slipped inside. He looked like he'd thrown it on over whatever he'd been sleeping in. Eyes, sharp hair sticking up a little. He carried a worn leather briefcase and glanced over his shoulder before closing the door firmly. Helena, he said, coming to the bed. You look terrible. Nice to see you too, Harold, she rasped. But there was warmth under the dry words. This is Ms. Carter. She's the one who called you. He turned to me, stuck out his hand. Ms. Carter, he said, I've heard your name. Usually in sentences that include, she works too hard. I shook his hand, feeling his grip firm, no nonsense. Just Evelyn, I said. Thank you for coming this late. For Helena, I'd come at 3 a.m. in a snowstorm, he replied. Then his face sobered. She said this was about her will. And poison. Those are two words that don't belong in the same sentence. Then let's separate them, Helena said. Before my time runs out. He pulled a chair closer to her bed, setting the briefcase down with a soft thud. You had me update the will 2 years ago, he reminded her. Right after the marriage. We allocated a generous portion to Mr. Grant as discussed. You told me you were comfortable with that arrangement. I was tired, she said, and lonely. And I let myself believe in a story I'd watched too many other women live badly. The, finally, a good man to lean on story. She turned her head and coughed a dry, painful sound. When she spoke again, her voice was hoarser but steady. I need that will changed, tonight. On what grounds, he asked. Helena, if this goes to court and with your estate, they're going to look for any sign you weren't of sound mind. I don't want to give them an easy opening. She glanced at me. Tell him she said. So I did. I repeated Richard's whisper. The conversation with the doctor by the vending machines, the tea, the pills, the swapped prescription bottles, the end-of-life comfort management comments. I talked faster than I meant to the words tumbling out because once I started, I couldn't hold them back. When I finished, the room felt heavier. Harold rubbed his forehead. Jesus, he muttered. Helena, if even half of that is true. It's true, she cut in. I should have called you sooner. I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself I was paranoid. That's the problem with being a strong woman your whole life, Harold. When you finally get tired, you want so badly to hand someone else the wheel that you ignore the fact they're steering toward a cliff. He stared at her for a long, assessing moment. How clear is your head right now? He asked. Be honest with me. She took a deep breath. I'm in pain, she said. I'm tired. I could list you every medication in that IV and how it metabolizes because I helped design half this hospital's protocols. My memory is intact. My judgment is intact. My patience is gone. He nodded slowly. That's about as Helena an answer as it gets. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a legal pad and a pen. All right. Tell me what you want. I want the clinics and hospital placed into a community trust that can't be sold or gutted by any one person, she said. We talked about that structure before. Remember, yes, he said. A nonprofit trust with a board of community representatives, medical staff, and a few key legally minded folks. You'd retain controlling interest while alive, but upon your death, the board operates by majority vote, she finished. No single heir can dismantle the safety net I've spent my life weaving. I was the one holding it up while I was breathing. When I'm gone, I want a whole line of hands grabbing that rope. He scribbled notes, nodding. And your personal assets? Properties, investment accounts. She turned her head toward me. I want Miss Carter housed and cared for, she said. She gets the brownstone on Willow Street. It's close to the hospital, needs some work, but it's solid. She gets a lifetime stipend enough to live without fear of choosing between medication and rent. I want that in writing with no room for reinterpretation. My mouth dropped open. Dr. Grant. Close your mouth before the flies go in. Ms. Carter, she murmured, a ghost of a smile. You've spent too many years one paycheck away from catastrophe. I'm not letting you spend the rest of them that way. Not if I can do something about it. Harold looked between us. Helena, that's a significant shift from the previous allocation to Mr. Grant. Yes, she said evenly. You can give him something small to keep his pride from bruising more than it needs to. A one-time payout. Enough for him to buy a nice car and cry into the leather seats. But he does not get my clinics. He does not get my hospital. He does not get any controlling interest in the trust. That's going to look, pointed, Harold warned. It will raise questions. Then let it, she replied. By the time anyone digs deep enough to ask those questions, I expect there will be more evidence than just one old cleaning lady's word and a strange cup of tea. I swallowed, old cleaning lady. That's how I'd always seen myself. The way she said it, though, made it sound like something else, like a witness, like a safeguard. Harold sighed. All right. We can drop a new will and trust documents emergency addendum. I'll need a notary and a witness. You have a notary on your staff, Helena reminded him. Drag her out of bed. She'll never forgive me, he muttered, but he was already pulling out his phone. And the witness. He looked at me. I can't be the witness and a beneficiary, I said, remembering something from one of those courtroom shows I watched on my days off. Correct, he nodded. You're too honest for your own good, Ms. Carter. He tapped his pen against the pad. We'll need someone else. Someone Helena trusts who isn't in line to gain financially from this. Helena's eyes drifted closed for a moment, then opened halfway. Chaplain, she whispered. Get the hospital chaplain. She's on call. She's never taken a dime from me. She sat with more of my patients in their last hours than anyone else. She knows what we're about here. Harold made another call. The words moved quickly now, legal phrases, logistical details. My head spun a little trying to keep up, but one thing came through clear. They were moving faster than Richard's countdown. The chaplain arrived in sweatpants and a cardigan thrown over a t-shirt that said, Be kind. Her hair was wrapped up in a scarf, and she carried a worn Bible under her arm. Helena, she said, coming to the bed with worry in her eyes. What's going on? Nothing a little midnight paperwork won't fix, Helena replied. This is Ms. Carter. You've seen her around. I know Ms. Carter, the chaplain said, giving me a gentle nod. You keep this place from falling apart at the seams. I felt my cheeks heat. Just trying to keep the floors from swallowing folks, I muttered. They set to work. For the next hour, the ICU room turned into the quietest little war room you ever saw. Documents came out of the briefcase. Drafts were written, reworded, written again. Legal terms were explained, nodded at, approved. The chaplain read over each page before adding her signature as witness. Helena initialed and signed with a hand that trembled but never hesitated. At one point, she had to stop and rest, eyes closed, breath shallow. I dabbed her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering, Almost there, Dr. Grant. Almost there. She opened her eyes and focused on me like I was the only thing holding her to that bed. If I start to drift, she murmured, You pinch me. I did. Gently on the back of her hand whenever her eyelids drooped for too long. It felt like holding a lantern up against a strong wind. Finally, Harold stacked the signed pages, slid them into a folder, and slipped that into his briefcase like it was made of glass. That's it, I asked, my voice hushed. That's it, he said. These are legally binding. We'll file everything first thing in the morning. Copies go to the registrar, the bank, the trust office. By this time tomorrow, even if someone drags this into court, they'll have a hard time undoing it. A flicker of relief passed over Helena's face. Her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. Good, she whispered. If I go before all that's stamped and sealed, you make sure those papers don't die in a drawer somewhere, Harold. You carry them like you're carrying my lungs. He nodded, throat tight. I will. The chaplain reached for Helena's hand. Do you want to pray? She asked softly. I want you to remember, Helena replied. When the dust settles, when the gossip starts about how the cleaning lady got the house and the trust and the big bad husband got cut out, I want you to remember what we talked about tonight. I want you to remind people who this hospital was built for and who tried to turn it into a cash machine. The chaplain's eyes flashed. I will, she said. You can count on it. They both left a few minutes later, slipping back into the night the way they'd come. It was just me and Helena again. The room quiet except for the steady beeping and the low hum of machines. She looked smaller now, drained, but there was something fierce settled in her gaze. It's done, I said softly. It's begun, she corrected. He won't take this lying down. Men like that never do. But at least now when he fights, he'll be fighting paper and signatures and a whole lot of witnesses, not just one sick woman and her tired friend with a mop. I tried to smile. You sure picked a lot for that tired friend to carry. She studied me. You think I chose the wrong person? I thought about all the years I'd spent invisible, all the secrets I'd heard in hallways, all the things I'd seen from the corner of rooms, all the times I'd talked myself out of speaking because I was just the cleaning lady. I thought about her hand squeezing mine, about the way she'd said, You're the one who sees what everyone else pretends isn't there. No, I said quietly. I think you chose exactly right. I'm just scared. Good, she said. Fear makes you careful. Just don't let it make you quiet. She glanced at the teacup on the table. Would you mind getting rid of that for me? She asked. I picked it up. The liquid was cold now, a thin skin formed on top. I carried it into the tiny bathroom, turned on the sink, and poured it down the drain. Then, on impulse, I opened the trash, pulled out the old prescription bottle I'd seen earlier, and tucked it into my pocket. Evidence. That word felt strange in my mind. Heavy. When I came back, Helena's eyes were closed, her breathing slower. You get some rest, I said. I'll be right outside if you need anything. She didn't answer, but her fingers twitched slightly on the blanket like she was still holding my hand. I stepped into the hallway, pulled the door mostly shut, and leaned against the wall for a second, letting the cool paint press against my back. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang. A baby cried. A nurse laughed at a joke. Life went on oblivious. Inside that one little room, though, the whole future of a hospital, a network of clinics, a lifeline for thousands of people had just shifted. And upstairs in some fancy condo I'd never see the inside of a man, was probably sleeping soundly, convinced that in 3 days' time everything would belong to him. He had no idea that 2 old black women, one in a hospital bed and one with a mop, had just put a crack in his plans big enough to drive justice through. I didn't sleep much after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Helena's signature scratching its way across those pages. I saw Harold sliding the folder into his briefcase. I heard Richard's whisper again, but this time, instead of chilling me, it made me clench my jaw. I went back to work the next evening with my stomach tied up like old phone cords. Fear walked in next to me, but so did something else, purpose. Thin, shaky, but there. When I stepped off the elevator onto the ICU floor, the first thing I saw was Richard. He was standing at the nurse's station, suit pressed, hair perfect, a paper cup of coffee in his hand that he clearly wasn't drinking. The nurse behind the desk looked uncomfortable, eyes flicking between him and the chart in front of her. "So you're saying no one signed in to visit her last night except me?" He asked, his tone light, but his jaw tight. "That's what the log shows," the nurse replied, tapping the clipboard. "Just you and regular staff, Mr. Grant. And the chaplain," he said. I heard her voice when I called around midnight. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The nurse shuffled some papers. She's on call. She might have stopped by to pray with another patient. I don't see her signed in under your wife's room, though." He took a slow sip of coffee, watching her over the rim. "Funny thing about paperwork," he murmured. "Sometimes it leaves things out." I walked past, pushing my cart, trying to look like I wasn't listening. He turned his head. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. "Evening, Ms. Carter." That smooth, practiced tone again. "Evening, Mr. Grant," I answered, forcing my feet not to hurry. "How's my wife?" he asked, falling into step beside my cart like we were old colleagues. "Sleeping peacefully, I hope." "She was very tired yesterday. She was awake some," I said carefully. "We talked a little." "Oh." His eyebrows lifted. "About what?" "About the weather." I lied, because sometimes lying is just self-defense. "She said she misses the sunshine." He smiled thinly. "Well, she won't have to miss it much longer," he said. "One way or another." The words were harmless enough on the surface. Just something people say when someone's terminal, "She'll be in a better place soon." But after everything I'd heard, they didn't land like comfort. They landed like a promise. He peeled off toward her room. I watched him tap the door lightly, slip inside the door, whispering shut behind him. I busied myself down the hall with a trash can that didn't really need emptying, and tried not to think about what might be in the cup of tea he was no doubt pouring. I didn't go into her room while he was there. I knew better than to push my luck. Predators don't like feeling watched. But later, after he'd left and the floor had settled back into its usual late-night rhythm, I knocked and stepped in. The room felt heavier. Helena's skin had that grayish undertone I'd seen too many times in too many rooms. Breath moving shallow under the blanket. Eyes half open, not quite focused. "How are we doing tonight?" I asked softly, closing the door. She turned her head a little slow, as if it hurt. "Like I'm almost done with this body," she whispered. Her voice was fainter, but under it there was a thread of satisfaction. "Papers filed. Harold said he'd take care of them first thing," I answered. "He promised." "Good," she breathed. "Then I can let go when it's time." I pulled the chair closer to her bed. "He's sniffing around," I warned. "Richard, ask." "Ing, who's been visiting?" "Why the chaplain was on the floor." Her lips twitched. "Let him sniff," she murmured. "Bloodhounds still can't smell a locked door open." Her fingers twitched weakly on the blanket. "Did you keep that bottle?" I touched my pocket. "Yes." "Good girl," she said. The words were so soft I almost missed them. We didn't talk much more that night. She drifted in and out of a doze that felt more like drifting toward a shore you can't see yet. I sat there, sometimes holding her hand, sometimes just listening to the machines and my own breath. At one point her eyes opened and found mine with surprising clarity. "If I don't wake up again," she said, "don't you let them make you doubt what you heard. Women like us, we're trained to talk ourselves out of the truth to keep the peace. Enough of that." My throat closed up. "Don't talk like that," I whispered. "I built a whole life talking like that," she replied. We don't get to pretend death doesn't exist just because it makes people uncomfortable. I'm not afraid of dying, Evelyn. I'm afraid of dying and leaving my people at the mercy of men who see them as ledger lines. Tears spilled over my lashes. I didn't bother to wipe them. We fixed the papers, I said. You fix them. That's something. That's more than something, she sighed. That's a shield. Small one, but better than nothing. Her breathing slowed again. The monitors kept up their steady work. I sat there until a nurse came in and gave me that look, gentle but firm, that says, "We need to do some things in here." I kissed my fingertips and pressed them to Helena's hand. "I'll be outside," I whispered. She didn't answer, but her fingers twitched again just once. She died 2 days later. Not in some big dramatic moment with thunder and music swelling. She just slipped. 1 minute she was breathing with effort, chest rising and falling under that thin blanket. The next minute there was an odd stillness and the monitor changed its song. By the time I made it up to the floor, she was already gone. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the nurses move quietly, gently. One of them, in her 20s, big brown eyes, was wiping Helena's face with a warm cloth like she was washing a beloved grandmother. "I'm sorry, Ms. Carter," she whispered when she saw me. "She passed about 20 minutes ago." "Was she alone?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The nurse hesitated. Her husband stepped out to make some calls, she said carefully. We paged him as soon as I nodded. "Thank you for being with her," I said. She wouldn't have wanted to go with strangers in the room. The nurse's eyes filled with tears. "She wasn't a stranger to us," she said. I walked over to the bed. The room felt wrong without Helena's spirit filling it. Her face was relaxed, all the fight and pain smoothed out. For the first time in months, she looked peaceful. I reached down and adjusted her scarf, smoothing it along her collarbone. "You did good," I whispered. "You did real good." A few hours later, the hospital was buzzing, staff passing the word, emails going out, people crying in break rooms. Community leaders started calling local news stations, sniffed around. Grant Memorial, without doctor. Grant was like a body without a heartbeat. The funeral was 3 days after that. It was held in a big old stone church downtown, the kind with stained glass windows and wooden pews that creaked under the weight of grief and memory. The place was full, doctors in suits, nurses in scrubs, patients in their Sunday best, folks from the neighborhood who'd never set foot in a hospital except hers. I sat near the back in a simple black dress I dug out of the closet, the one I'd worn to too many funerals already. My feet ached in shoes that weren't made for people who spend their lives standing. Richard was up front, of course. Perfect black suit, perfect tie, face arranged in that careful mask of sorrow people practice in mirrors. He dabbed his eyes at the right moment, stood when he was supposed to, sat when he was supposed to. When they invited family to speak, he went to the pulpit and told stories about their love, about their shared dreams, about how devastated he was. He was a good actor. I'll give him that. What he didn't talk about was her work. That part came from the people whose lives she'd touched, the single mother who said Helena had saved her baby when no one else would see them. The old man who said she treated him like a human being when another hospital had treated him like a liability. One of the nurses stood up and talked about how Helena would stay late, slip extra snacks into the staff room, write personal thank you notes on little scraps of paper, all while Richard sat there, hands folded like the star of a show that wasn't actually about him. After the service, there was a burial. Then, a reception with finger sandwiches and pound cake in the church basement. People hugged, cried, laughed a little at memories. The air smelled like coffee and cologne and grief. I slipped out early. Grief is heavy enough. I didn't want to add rage to the mix by watching him play grieving widower some more. But there was one thing I refused to miss. A week later, I found myself sitting in a big conference room at a law office I'd never have walked into under normal circumstances. The chairs were too soft, the carpet too thick. Everything smelled like lemon polish and money. "This is for the reading of the will," Harold had explained over the phone. "You're a named beneficiary, Ms. Carter. You have a right to be there." The idea of me, a woman whose whole life had been lived on the other side of sanitation signs, sitting in a room like that to hear about an inheritance, felt like putting a mop bucket in the middle of a jewelry store. Out of place. Wrong. But I went. There were only a handful of us there. Harold at the head of the table, glasses low on his nose. Richard on one side, stiff and composed. A board member from the hospital, the chaplain. And me perched on the edge of my chair, like I might be asked to get up and clean under it any minute. Harold cleared his throat. "We're here to execute the last will and testament of Dr. Helena Marie Grant," he said. His voice was steady, but I saw his jaw tighten. He read through some formal language I didn't understand, all being of sound mind and body and revoking all prior instruments. My heart thudded in my ears. First, he continued, Dr. Grant directs that all medical debts incurred by uninsured patients at her clinics in the 2 years prior to her death be forgiven where legally permissible, and that the trust absorb those costs where not. Richard shifted in his seat. Next, Harold said Dr. Grant confirms the establishment of the Helena Grant Community Health Trust as detailed in the attached documents transferring ownership of Grant Memorial Hospital and all associated community clinics into the trust. Governance shall fall to the board described therein. The board member nodded, lips pressed tight. The chaplain's eyes glistened. Harold kept reading. Legal phrases, details. Then, as for my personal residence and real property holdings, he continued, I bequeath the property located at 417 Willow Street, including all fixtures and furnishings therein, to Ms. Evelyn Louise Carter in recognition of her years of loyal service, and as acknowledgement that no one should spend their old age wondering if they can afford to keep the lights on. My name sounded strange in that room, strange and right. Richard's head snapped toward me like he'd just realized I was more than furniture. Harold went on. Dr. Grant further directs that a lifetime monthly stipend in the amount specified in Schedule B be paid to Ms. Carter from the trust adjusted for inflation annually for as long as Ms. Carter shall live. My hands trembled in my lap. I stared down at them, the deep lines, the worn knuckles. Hands that had scrubbed and wiped and carried for other people's comfort, now written into papers with words like stipend and adjusted for inflation. Regarding her husband, Mr. Richard Allen Grant, Harold said, and the room went very still. Dr. Grant bequeaths a one-time lump sum payment also specified in Schedule B as a gesture of appreciation for companionship, with the express stipulation that Mr. Grant shall hold no controlling interest, direct or indirect, in the Helena Grant Community Health Trust or its Board of Governance. You could have heard a dust mote fall. Richard's face went from pale to flushed in a heartbeat. This is a joke, he said, half laughing. That's not the will we discussed 2 years ago. Harold didn't flinch. It's the will she signed last week, he replied. In the presence of myself, a licensed notary, and the hospital chaplain who all attest to her sound mind at the time. Richard's eyes narrowed. Last week, he repeated. She was medicated. Weak. That's not. She was lucid. The chaplain cut in quietly but firmly. She was clearer that night than I'd seen her in months. She knew exactly what she was doing. He slammed his palm on the table. She was under the influence of painkillers. She could be manipulated, Richard Harold said, his tone cool. I understand this is a shock. You are, of course, within your rights to challenge the will in court, but I would advise you to consider that any such challenge would open up extensive discovery into the weeks preceding her death. Something almost like fear flickered across his face before he smoothed it away. Are you threatening me? He demanded. I'm telling you. Harold replied that in the process of challenging her mental fitness, you would be inviting a very close look at her medical records, medication changes, and any unusual conversations you may have had with her care team. Richard laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You think anyone's going to take the word of a janitor? He jerked his head in my direction over mine. My cheeks burned, but I lifted my chin. He'd called me worse in his head, I was sure. Mr. Grant, Harold said, voice still calm. No one here has mentioned Ms. Carter's testimony yet. You might want to ask yourself why that possibility worries you. The room held its breath. For a heartbeat, I saw something raw in Richard's eyes, something wild and cornered. Then the mask slipped back on. This is outrageous, he said, standing. I will be speaking to my attorneys. You haven't heard the last of this. I expect not, Harold replied. But in the meantime, the trust documents are filed. The hospital and clinics are no longer part of your inheritance to fight over. Only your portion of the estate is in question. And frankly, compared to what Dr. Grant built, it's not much. Richard glared at each of us and turned his gaze lingering on me like a blade. It said, You did this. Then he walked out the door, swinging shut behind him, harder than necessary. Silence followed him out. My hands were still shaking. I didn't know she was going to do all that, I whispered. Harold looked at me over his glasses. She did, he said. She'd been thinking about it for a long time, Miss Carter. Don't cheapen her choices by acting like you tricked her into anything. You brought her the truth. The rest was her. The chaplain reached over and squeezed my arm. She trusted you, she said. She trusted me too. We'll need to live up to that now. The board member cleared his throat. There's going to be blowback, he said. From him. From people who liked the old power structure. From the community when they hear the gossip. Oh, there will be gossip, the chaplain said wryly. About the cleaning lady who got the house. About the gold digger who stole the inheritance. My stomach clenched. I'd already heard whispers in the hospital halls. People look at you different when they hear you're suddenly in a will. Let them talk, Harold said. They can say what they want. At the end of the day, the documents stand. And if Richard chooses to fight? His gaze turned flinty. Well, then we get the authorities involved. In a deeper way than they've been involved so far. I frowned. Authorities. He looked at me. You gave me that bottle, he said. I passed it along. Quietly to someone who knows what to do with it. There are tests being run. Discreet inquiries happening. If those come back the way I suspect they will, Mr. Grant's concern about his inheritance will become the least of his problems. A chill ran down my spine. Not fear this time. Something like grim hope. I walked out of that law office into the bright afternoon sun, feeling like I'd stepped into a different life without meaning to. On the sidewalk, people hurried past. Cars honked. Somewhere a street musician played a saxophone, the notes weaving through the city noise. I stood there a minute, clutching my purse, thinking about Helena. About the promises I'd made in that dim ICU room, with machines humming and fear sitting heavy on my chest. She was gone. But her fight wasn't. And whether I felt ready or not, I was in it now. I wish the story ended there with a signed, will a slam door, and justice neatly boxed up in legal paper. Life doesn't work that clean. For a little while after the will reading, things were tense but quiet. The hospital kept moving. Patients still got sick. Babies still got born. Bills still had to be paid. Grief doesn't shut the lights off. It just changes how the light feels. People looked at me differently, though. In the break room, conversations paused when I walked in. In the hallways, whispers started a beat too late. Some folks came up and hugged me, told me Helena would be so glad you're taken care of. Others smiled, two big eyes sharp, asking, so, you moving into that big house now, like they were poking a bruise to see if I'd flinch. More than once I heard the word lucky slip out of someone's mouth when they thought I couldn't hear. Lucky. Like I'd scratched off a winning ticket instead of helping a dying woman drag the truth into the light. I tried to let it roll off my back. I'd spent a lifetime not being seen. Being seen wrong was just another kind of misjudgment. But it wore on me like water on stone. A week after the will reading, I found a note stuck under my apartment door. No envelope, no name, just a folded piece of paper. I opened it at my kitchen table under the yellow light that made everything look a little worn. The handwriting was neat, blocky. A man's hand. We need to talk. Parking garage level 2 after your shift tomorrow. Come alone. Underneath a phone number. My heart climbed up into my throat. I didn't need a signature to know who it was from. I stared at that paper for a long time. Part of me wanted to tear it up, drop it in the trash, and pretend I'd never seen it. Another part of me, the part that had sat in that ICU room pinching Helena's hand to keep her awake, knew that ignoring him wouldn't make him go away. Men like Richard don't just slink off into the shadows when they don't get their way. They circle back. They try doors. They push. I folded the note, tucked it back into the envelope of bills on the table, and reached for my phone. The chaplain answered on the second ring. Ms. Carter. You all right? Depends what you call all right, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Can you get Harold on the line and... Whoever it was he hinted at when he talked about that bottle. She didn't ask questions, just said, stay where you are, and hung up. 15 minutes later, my phone rang again. Harold's voice this time. Calm, precise, with an edge under it. Tell me everything he said. So I did. He didn't interrupt, didn't swear, didn't gasp. When I finished, there was a small silence. Do you still have the note, he asked. Yes. Good. Don't throw it away. And don't call that number. We've been working with a detective on this, quietly, he said. Those toxicology tests came back. There were substances in Dr. Grant's blood that should not have been there at those levels combined with her prescribed medications. Enough to raise more than eyebrows. My stomach clenched. Hearing it confirmed out loud made the air in my kitchen feel thicker. What does that mean, I asked. It means this is more than a suspicious death on paper, he replied. It's the beginnings of a homicide case. I closed my eyes. I'd known in my bones. But knowing and hearing it put in words are different things. If Mr. Grant wants to talk to you, Harold continued, we can accommodate that. Accommodate, I repeated. There was another voice on the line now, deeper, unfamiliar. Ms. Carter, "This is Detective Morris with the city police," it said. "I've been reviewing some information Mr. Whitfield in the medical examiner's office shared with me. My condolences on your loss," he added, and it sounded like he meant it. "Thank you," I murmured. "I understand you've been in the middle of a lot," he went on. "And I won't lie to you, this is dangerous. Men who think they're about to lose everything can be unpredictable. But if you're willing, that meeting might be exactly what we need to move forward." My hand tightened around the phone. "You want to use me as bait?" I said bluntly. "No point dancing around it." "Yes, ma'am," he answered just as blunt. "We can put eyes on you. Mike's cameras. You won't be alone no matter what he wrote in that note. But he's more likely to say what he really thinks to someone he underestimates than to a cop in an interrogation room." The words terrified me. They also rang true. I thought about Helena's hand in mine, about her saying, "Don't let them make you quiet." I thought about all the old women I'd seen in hospital beds with nobody to speak up for them, about every time I'd turned my head away from something ugly because I was afraid of losing my job, my rent, my little bit of safety. Then I thought about that countdown in Richard's voice. 3 more days. I took a breath that felt like a crossroads. What would I have to do, I asked. The next evening, my shift dragged heavy and strange. I moved through my tasks, emptying trash, wiping counters, mopping floors with a sense of unreality, like I was walking through a dream I'd had about myself instead of my actual life. Detective Morris had met me in the hospital cafeteria a few hours earlier. He was a big man, not just in size, but presence, with tired eyes and a notebook that looked like it had seen too many stories. He slid a small black object across the table no bigger than a sugar packet. "This clips inside your uniform collar," he explained. "It's a recorder and transmitter. Audio only. We'll be in the van by the loading dock listening in. We'll also have 2 plainclothes officers in the garage already leaning on cars staring at their phones, looking like they're minding their own business. And if he tries something I asked, then he'll find out just how fast 2 men minding their own business can move," Morris said. "But I need him talking, Ms. Carter. I need him off script. The bottle and the tox report are bad for him, but they're not a slam dunk. If he was careful, he can argue she was just over-medicated, that it was all under medical supervision." He met my eyes. "What I can't argue away is him threatening you, talking about his plans, admitting he wanted her gone. Let him run his mouth. He strikes me as the type who likes to hear himself talk." "Oh, he does," I muttered. Now, as the end of my shift crept closer, I kept touching my collar like a nervous habit. The little device was hidden behind the edge of my uniform top, invisible unless you were looking for it. I felt like everyone's eyes were on me, even though no one was paying me any more mind than usual. When 11:45 p.m. rolled around, I parked my cart in the supply closet, hung my out-to-break sign on the door, and took the elevator down to the parking garage. Level 2 smelled like exhaust and old rain. The lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that sickly yellow glow that makes even new paint look tired. Cars were parked in neat rows, a few oil spots dotting the concrete. My footsteps echoed. I spotted the 2 men minding their own business near the far wall. One leaned against a sedan, scrolling his phone. The other pretended to dig through his trunk. Neither of them looked at me. That was the point. I swallowed and stepped out into the open. He was already there. Richard stood near one of the support pillars, hands in the pockets of a casual jacket, this time instead of a suit. Even dressed down, he radiated money and arrogance. His smile appeared as soon as he saw me, wide and false. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice echoing slightly. "Right on time. I appreciate punctuality." "Couldn't sleep anyway," I answered. "What do you want?" he tisked softly. "Is that any way to speak to your late employer's grieving husband?" "Pretty sure we left grieving back in that law office," I said. Fear made my tongue looser than usual. "Nice performance, by the way." Something flickered in his eyes. The smile thinned. "You've gotten bold," he observed. "Must feel nice having your name in all those papers. New house. Regular check every month. Not bad for someone who cleans toilets." My jaw clenched. "I cleaned a lot more than toilets in that hospital," I said. "I cleaned up after people like you." He chuckled. "You think you're better than me now." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You think because she scribbled your name on some documents at the last minute, you're suddenly my equal." I took a small step back, more to keep my courage from spilling out of me than from real distance. The detective's plan ran through my head. Keep him talking, keep him talking, keep him talking. "I think she finally did what she should have done a long time ago," I replied. "She made sure the person who actually gave a damn about her work wasn't left out in the cold." His jaw clenched. He took another step, closing the space between us. I could smell his cologne, expensive, sharp cloying. You poisoned her against me, he hissed. You and that ambulance-chasing lawyer and that sanctimonious chaplain, whispering in her ear when she was weak, making her doubt me, turning her into a paranoid old woman. I felt my fingernails dig into my palms. She didn't need help doubting you, I said. All she had to do was listen to you. His eyes flashed. Is that what this is about? He sneered. You overhear a few conversations you don't understand and suddenly you're Miss Marple. You think you're smart enough to grasp what it takes to run an estate like hers? To manage all that money, all that responsibility? I think I understand what it takes to not kill the person you claim to love. I shot back before I could stop myself. His hand shot out, grabbing my upper arm. His fingers dug into my flesh hard enough to bruise. I swallowed a yelp. Careful, he murmured. You don't want to say things you can't take back. I looked up at him, heart pounding so loud I was sure the microphone would pick it up. You asked me here to threaten me, I asked, forcing my voice not to tremble. I asked you here to give you a chance, he said. You're in over your head, Evelyn. You've got no idea the storm you've stepped into. These investigators, these lawyers, they'll chew you up and spit you out. But He leaned in closer, breath hot on my face. I'm willing to be generous. Generous. The word felt dirty in my mouth. If you sign a statement, he continued saying, Helena wasn't in her right mind when she changed the will, that she was confused, easily influenced. That other people, he sneered, the words talked her into it. If you do that, I can make sure you still get a little something, enough to move into a nicer place, enough to pay for your retirement. But this house nonsense, this stipend from the trust, no. That goes away. He squeezed my arm tighter. You don't belong in that house, he said. You don't belong on any legal document with numbers like that. People like you aren't built for that kind of money. You'll just waste it. My fear had been simmering like a pot on low. His words turned up the heat. You mean people like me aren't supposed to own anything you can't take? I said, my voice quiet but steady. Is that what you're saying? He barked a humorless laugh. I'm saying you're a woman in her 60s with no real education, no business experience, no understanding of how the world works. You've been pushing a mop your whole life. Now you think you're going to sit on the board of some big trust make decisions. Please. I don't need to sit on any board to know what you did, I replied. I just needed ears. His nostrils flared. What I did, he said, was, watch my wife die slowly. What I did was push for the humane option when the doctors were too cowardly to say enough. They called it palliative care. I called it mercy. Mercy. I repeated, my voice shaking now. Is that what you call counting down days to her death, like you're waiting for a check to clear? His face twisted. You don't know what it's like, he snapped. Watching someone slip away day after day, losing pieces of themselves, living on machines. Do you have any idea how much that costs, financially, emotionally? Yes, I said quietly. I do. I've mopped under those machines. I've emptied trash cans full of used gloves and tissues. I've watched families cry over bills in the hallway. The difference is, they weren't waiting for a chance to cash out. He made a small, ugly sound. She was going to die anyway, he muttered. All I did was accelerate the inevitable. She was just clinging to some dream that she could outlive her own body. Is that what you told yourself, I asked? When you brought her those pills, that tea? When you told that doctor you wanted things wrapped up neatly? His grip tightened. I winced. You're not recording this, are you? He asked suddenly. Eyes narrowing. He glanced around the garage. My heart stopped for half a second, then lurched back into motion. You really think I'd know how to do that? I scoffed, forcing out a shaky laugh. I barely know how to send a text, he snorted. Fair point, he said. You're not exactly tech-savvy. He relaxed a hair. Just enough. Listen to me, Evelyn, he said, leaning in so close I could see the tiny veins in his eyes. Helena's dead. Nothing you do is going to change that. But you can decide whether you spend the rest of your life comfortable or miserable. You sign what I put in front of you, you say? She was confused that the chaplain pressured her, that her doctor warned her against making big decisions. He did. I cut in. He warned her against making big decisions that didn't include you. His mouth flattened. You really think the police, the courts, the public are going to take your word over mine, he demanded. I'm respected. I have connections. You're the one who heard you count down to her death, I finished. You're right, though. I am scared. Terrified. You're bigger than me. Richer than me. Whiter than most people in those courtrooms gonna be. But you made one mistake, Mr. Grant. And what's that, he asked, through gritted teeth? You underestimated how much a woman with a mop can see, I said, and how tired she can get of being quiet. His hand moved then not away, but up. For a heartbeat, I thought he was going to hit me. Instead, he grabbed the front of my uniform, bunching the fabric in his fist, pulling me forward so my toes left the ground. "Do you really think anyone will care if something happens to you?" he hissed. "Old women fall. They have accidents. They slip in the shower. They get mugged in parking garages. Who's going to question it if someone finds you at the bottom of a stairwell?" I would came a new voice. Sharp. Unmistakable. For a split second, Richard's eyes flicked over my shoulder. Then everything happened at once. Feet pounded on concrete, shouts echoed off the low ceiling. "Police! Let her go." Hands where we can see them. Red and blue lights flickered at the far end of the garage, cast by an unmarked car I hadn't even noticed. The two men minding their own business sprang into motion. One yanked Richard's arm away from me, twisting it behind his back. The other stepped between us, hand out like a shield. I stumbled back, lungs screaming, arm throbbing where his fingers had dug in. "What the hell is this?" Richard snarled as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "You can't." "She's lying." "She set me up." Detective Morris stepped into view. Badge held up, face hard. "We can and we did," he said. "Richard Allen Grant. You're under arrest on suspicion of homicide, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. You have the right to remain silent." Richard tried to twist away, eyes wild. "She's nothing," he shouted, jerking his chin toward me. "She's a janitor. She's crazy." "You should have remembered that before you started confessing to accelerating the inevitable on a live microphone," Morris said flatly, nodding toward my collar. We got every word. For the first time since I'd met him, I saw real fear in Richard's eyes. Not anger, not annoyance. Fear. He opened his mouth like he was going to protest, then shut it. Something changed in his face, a calculation shifting gears. The mask slid back into place. "I want my lawyer," he said coldly. "You can tell him all about mercy and inevitability," Morris replied. "We'll be happy to replay the tape for both of you." They led him away, his expensive shoes scuffing the oil-stained concrete. For a moment I just stood there, shaking my body, suddenly aware of every ache and bruise. Morris turned to me. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentler now. I nodded, then shook my head, then laughed a little hysterically. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think I left okay about 3 parking spaces back." He gave a half smile. "That's fair," he said. "But you did good, Miss Carter. Real good. You gave us what we needed." I touched my collar, feeling the tiny device under the fabric. "I just talked," I said. "Sometimes that's all it takes to put a man like that in a cage," he replied. "Someone willing to say out loud what everyone else pretends not to notice." The rest of it moved like slow motion and fast forward at the same time. There were interviews, statements, more questions than I thought existed. I sat in rooms with bare walls and buzzing lights telling the same story over and over to people who wrote it all down and asked me to repeat it one more time, just to be clear. The toxicology reports came in officially. They used words like toxic accumulation, contraindicated combinations, administration inconsistent with prescribed doses. The medical board opened its own investigation into the doctor who'd adjusted Helena's medications under Richard's urging. They found money deposits in accounts that didn't match paychecks, payments that lined up a little too neatly with dosage changes. The doctor folded quick under that pressure, traded his slippery loyalty for a plea deal. The nurse who'd taken bonuses followed. The whole rotten little circle started caving in. By the time the trial rolled around, the story had leaked. Local news ran with it. Prominent hospital founder's death under investigation. Husband charged in alleged poisoning a philanthropist doctor. Whistleblower custodian key witness in homicide case. They put a picture of me on the TV once. I almost dropped my fork when I saw my own tired face on the screen, uniform, badge, eyes older than I felt. "Turn that mess off," I muttered, jabbing the remote. I wasn't built for seeing myself through other people's lenses. The day I took the stand, my knees shook so bad, I thought I might not make it from the witness bench to the little wooden chair without help. The courtroom was packed, reporters in the back, hospital staff in the middle, strangers hungry for spectacle. Richard sat at the defense table in a nice suit, hairstyled, hands folded. If you didn't know better, you'd think he was the one attending a business meeting about his grief, not a trial about his guilt. His eyes bored into me as I raised my right hand and swore to tell the truth. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor said. "Evelyn Louise Carter." I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. They asked me about my job, my years at the clinic, how long I'd known Dr. Grant. I told them. They tried to make me seem solid, to the jury grounded. someone who'd been around long enough to see patterns. Then they asked about the night in the hallway, the tea, the pills, the conversation by the vending machines, the will, the parking garage. I told it all. Sometimes my voice trembled, sometimes it didn't. The jury watched me the way people watch a storm out a window, part fearful, part fascinated. The defense lawyer tried to poke holes. "Ms. Carter, you're not a doctor, are you?" he asked. "No, sir," I replied. "You don't have any medical training." "No, sir. So, when you say you smelled something metallic in the tea that's not based on scientific knowledge, that's just your impression." "Yes, sir, it's based on a lifetime of smelling things I had to clean up." A couple of jurors hid smiles behind their hands. "And when you say Mr. Grant sounded hungry, that's not a measurable observation, is it?" he pressed. "That's your feeling." "Yes, sir," I said. "Same kind of feeling you get when you walk down a dark alley and somebody's footsteps behind you don't sound like they're just passing through." He frowned. "You don't like my client very much, do you?" I looked at Richard, looked back at the lawyer. "No, sir," I said. "Not anymore." "So is it possible," he went on, "that your dislike for him colored how you interpreted his words, that you heard threat where there was only frustration, that you saw normal end-of-life care, and because you'd watched too many crime shows decided there was poison where there was only mercy?" I took a breath. "It's possible for anybody to be wrong," I said. "I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again." But I didn't just hear his words once. I heard them more than once. I saw the way he acted with the doctors. I saw the bottle. I smelled the tea. And I watched him try to get me to lie about Helena's mind and threaten me in a parking garage. That part wasn't about medical care. That part was about money. The prosecutor played the recording from the parking garage. Every ugly word. Every sneer. Every inevitable he'd thrown around like a shield. Hearing it in that room echoing off paneled walls was surreal. The jury watched him while his own voice filled the air talking about accelerating the inevitable, about old women having accidents, about people like you not being built for that kind of money. For the first time, I saw some of them look genuinely disgusted. When it was all over, when the lawyers had made their speeches and the judge had explained the law and the jury had disappeared into a room with a locked door, I sat on a wooden bench in the hallway and stared at my hands. The chaplain sat beside me, her scarf bright against the drab walls. "No matter what they decide," she said, "you told the truth." "I know," I whispered. "I just really want the truth to mean something for once." It did. The jury didn't take long. They filed back in faces solemn. The foreman stood. The judge asked the question. "On the charge of homicide in the death of Dr. Helena Marie Grant, how do you find the defendant guilty?" the foreman said. The word seemed to ring in my ears long after the courtroom noise swallowed it. They read through the other charges: conspiracy, witness, intimidation. Guilty, guilty. Richard didn't explode, didn't shout. He just sat there, jaw clenched, face tight, like a man trying not to show pain after getting hit by a car. For a brief moment, our eyes met. There was hate there, but under it there was something else. He'd finally realized that all his charm, all his connections, all his money hadn't been enough to out-talk a dying woman's paperwork and an old janitor's stubbornness. The judge handed down a long sentence, numbers that meant he'd be an old man if he lived that long when he walked out of a cell again. Afterward, in the hallway, reporters pressed forward. Microphones, cameras, questions. "Ms. Carter, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you think justice was served? Are you afraid of backlash from the community?" I put up my hand, palm out, like I was warding off a wave. "I don't have much to say," I told them. "Except this Dr. Grant spent her life building something to keep people alive when the world seemed determined to let them die. A lot of people tried to stop her. They failed. One person tried to profit off her death. He failed too. The rest is just noise. They wanted more." But I was done turning my grief into sound bites. I went home. Home now was that brownstone on Willow Street. The first night I slept there, the house felt too big. The floors creaked differently than my old apartment. The air smelled like wood polish and history. I walked from room to room, turning on lights, turning them off again, trying to imagine Helena pacing those same floors in her younger years, dreaming up ways to outmaneuver insurance companies. I stood in the kitchen, hand flat on the counter. "I don't know what I'm doing," I told the empty room. "Just so we're clear, you left a woman with varicose veins and an inhaler in charge of a lot of things people with briefcases think they should run." A breeze moved the curtain. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed in the distance. "But I know what you wanted," I added. You wanted that hospital and those clinics to stay open. You wanted people like us to have somewhere to go when our bodies start failing. That much I can protect. The rest, we'll figure out as we go. In the months that followed, I learned more about trusts and boards and budgets than I ever expected to. I sat in meetings with people who had letters after their names and weren't sure if they should call me Ms. Carter or Ms. Trustee, like the title would change who I was in my bones. I let them trip over it. I answered to all of it as long as they were talking about keeping the doors open and the care honest. There were rough patches. There were people who didn't like taking direction from a woman whose hands still smelled faintly of bleach. There were rumors and snide comments and more than one op-ed in the local paper questioning whether an uncredentialed individual should have any say in a major health trust. I kept cleaning, not floors, not anymore. But I cleaned up in other ways. Cleaned up contracts that favored profit over patients. Cleaned up a few quiet arrangements some folks had gotten used to. Cleaned up a culture that had, in little ways, started to forget why the place existed. I kept my old uniform, though, hung it in the closet in the brownstone. Every so often, I'd open the door, run my fingers over the worn fabric, and remember what it felt like to be invisible. It kept me from getting dizzy when people started treating me like I was important. Sometimes when my knees hurt and the board meeting ran long and the stack of paperwork on my kitchen table looked like a small mean mountain, I'd think about Helena in that ICU bed, about the way she'd said, "You're dangerous in a good way." I'd laugh, shake my head, and keep going. On the anniversary of her death, the hospital held a memorial. They asked me to say a few words. Me. Out of all the doctors and donors and politicians who wanted a spot at the microphone, they wanted the old woman with the mop who'd helped keep her alive long enough to save her legacy. I stood at the podium looking out at faces young, old, black, white, everything in between. Some wearing lab coats, some wearing scrubs, some wearing Sunday best, some wearing clothes that had probably seen more than one funeral. "We're not here today just because a person died," I said. "We're here because of how she lived." I told them a few small stories. About teacups and sticky notes. About late-night talks in dark clinics. About the way she called people Ms. and Mr. no matter what their badge said. "And we're here," I added, because one woman refused to let her work be buried with her. She fixed it on paper. She trusted a lot of people. She trusted me. And let me tell you something, there is no weight heavier and no honor greater than being trusted by somebody who could have looked right past you and didn't. I looked out at the crowd, at the old lady in the second row with swollen ankles, at the young man with asthma inhalers peeking out of his shirt pocket, at the nurse with dark circles under her eyes and calluses on her hands. "I'm not special," I said. "I'm not a hero. I'm just somebody who got tired of being quiet when it mattered. A lot of you in this room have seen things, heard things, felt that little twist in your gut that says, this ain't right. The lesson in all this isn't just rich people can be wicked or justice takes a long time. It's this." I took a breath. Sometimes the only thing standing between evil and the people you love is one scared old woman who decides she's tired of staying out of it. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. "If you remember anything about Helena," I finished, "remember that she built this place so you'd have somewhere to go when your body is failing and your pockets are light. And if you remember anything about me, don't let it be the gossip about houses and wills. Let it be that I heard something wrong, and instead of telling myself a pretty lie so I could sleep, I told the truth and lived with the fear." I stepped down from the podium to polite applause, some tears, some thoughtful frowns. Later that night, back in the brownstone, I made myself a cup of tea. Good tea. Safe tea. The kind I'd watched Helena drink in her office long before Richard's shadow ever darkened her doorway. I sat by the window, the city humming outside the lights of the hospital, visible in the distance, like a small constellation. This was one of those quiet moments nobody puts in news stories. No headlines, no verdicts, just an old black woman in her 60s, bones, aching heart, full sipping tea in a house she'd never expected to own, looking at a building that might still be standing long after she was gone. A life lesson story doesn't always end with fireworks. Sometimes it ends with someone like me sitting alone, grateful and tired, knowing that somewhere in a room with flickering fluorescent lights, a nurse is checking a patient's vitals in a hospital that still belongs to the people it was built for, and knowing that for once in my long ordinary life I hadn't just cleaned around the mess, I'd helped stop it from spreading. A few weeks after that memorial, I was walking through the lobby of Grant Memorial, not in my uniform this time, just in my church shoes and a cardigan, when a voice called out behind me, "Ms. Carter." "Ms. Carter, ma'am." I turned. A woman in her 70s maybe hurried up to me. She had a cane in one hand and a little plastic pharmacy bag in the other. Her hair was pulled back under a scarf, and she wore that tired but still going look I recognized in my own mirror. "Yes, ma'am," I said. She stopped to catch her breath. "I'm sorry," she panted. "I didn't mean to trouble you. I saw your picture on the bulletin board by the elevators. Said your name and something about the trust." "Oh," that I said suddenly, wishing they hadn't put that thing up. "What can I do for you?" She held up the bag. "I wanted to say thank you," she said. "For this?" I frowned, not understanding. "For your pills?" She nodded. "Blood pressure medicine, insulin inhaler. Used to cost so much I'd break the pills in half to make 'em last." She gave a wry little smile. "Doctor yelled at me, but yelling doesn't change what's in a bank account." "I know that song," I said quietly. She shifted her cane. "They told me at the clinic that some new fund was helping cover the costs she went on. Said I qualified. Said I didn't have to choose between keeping my lights on and keeping my heart beating no more." My throat tightened. "That's the Helena Grant Community Health Fund," I said, enunciating each word like a small prayer. "It's her work, just on paper now." The woman nodded. "They told me that too, and they said there was some janitor lady, cleanin' lady, who helped make sure it stayed that way when some fool tried to mess with it." Her eyes searched my face. "I figured if I ever saw you, I'd say this," she said. "I don't know what you did. I don't need all the details. But tonight I'm going to take every pill the way that doctor told me to, and I'm going to sleep without staring at the electric bill on my table." "That's a big thing in a small life, Ms. Carter." I felt the sting at the back of my eyes again. Funny how often it showed up these days. "Well, I managed." "I'm glad you're taking your medicine, sister. The world's rough enough without you making it harder on your own heart." She chuckled. "Amen to that." Then her face softened. "You must have been scared," she added, "going up against folks with money and titles like that." I thought about the parking garage, the courtroom. Richard's hand on my arm, the sound of my own voice on that recording shaking but steady. "Yes, ma'am," I said. I was scared all the way through. "So, why'd you do it?" she asked. I looked past her through the big glass doors at the street outside. People crossing, buses rumbling, life moving. "Because somebody had to," I answered. And that somebody turned out to be me. She studied me for a moment, then nodded like she was tucking the answer away for later. "Well," she said, hitching the pharmacy bag higher, "I'm real glad it was." We said goodbye. I watched her shuffle toward the exit, shoulders a little straighter than when she'd come in. That night, my granddaughter called. She lives 2 states away, busy with her own life kids job, all the things young folks juggle these days, but we talk once a week more if the Lord's kind and the cell towers behave. "Grandma," she said, "my friend at work sent me this article about you. You're like low-key famous. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I'm high-key tired." I told her, making her laugh. She got serious. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I know it was scary. I know you don't like being in the spotlight, but you did something huge. It just feels like I did what needed doing," I replied. "That's what makes it a big deal," she said. "Most people see something wrong and wait for someone else to fix it. You didn't." There was a pause. I could hear one of her boys in the background asking for a snack. "Grandma," she said a little softer. If I ever get in a situation where telling the truth might cost me something, will you remind me of this? Of what you did?" I smiled into the phone, feeling the years between us fold up for a second. "I'll remind you of this," I said, "that your voice counts even when the world tells you it doesn't. That people with money and fancy words aren't always the ones who know right from wrong, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak up while your knees are shaking." She was quiet for a beat. "You just turned that into a whole sermon," she laughed. "You know that, right? Can't help it," I said. "Old women talkin' sermons, comes with the gray hair." After we hung up, I sat in my chair by the window of the brownstone, the same chair I'd sat in back at my old apartment when this all started. Different walls, different street, same sky. I thought about all the small choices that had led me here. Taking a job for the health insurance. Saying yes to a boss who called me Ms. Carter instead of the help. Listening in a hallway when I could have kept humming to myself. Knocking on a hospital room door instead of pretending I hadn't heard anything. Any one of those choices could have gone another way. But they didn't. People like to think big stories get written by big moments. Sometimes that's true. More often they're written in little ones. In the seconds where you decide whether to look closer or look away. In the breaths where you decide whether to speak or stay silent. If you're listening to this sitting in your own chair, maybe, with your own aches and your own regrets, let me tell you what this old black woman learned the hard way. You are never too small to matter. You are never too old to be dangerous to the wrong kind of people. And you are never ever so used to being ignored that your voice can't change the story when you finally decide to use it. Helena's gone now. One day I will be too. That's how this life goes. We all have an exit waiting. But somewhere tonight in a clinic with peeling paint and good hearts, an elder is picking up a bag of medicine they can suddenly afford. Somewhere a nurse is clocking in for the night shift in a hospital that still belongs to the community it serves. Somewhere a woman with a mop is hearing something that doesn't sit right in her spirit, and maybe because of this little life lesson story, she'll decide not to clean around it. Maybe she'll decide to raise hell instead. When that happens, when some other Miss Carter somewhere stands up on shaking legs and tells the truth, I like to think Helena will be smiling wherever she is, and I'll be smiling too. Because in the end, that's all this really is. A story about two old women who refuse to let greed have the last word, and about how even the quietest among us can turn a whisper in the hallway into justice that echoes a long, long time.